Welcome to Bad at Goodbyes. Each week on our show, we spotlight species from the IUCN Critically Endangered Red List. These are plants and animals with decreasing populations, nearing the edges of extinction. We'll share species research information and conservation proposals, and then we'll spend a chunk of the show opening a space for contemplation and awe. We'll perform a kind of meditative soundscape of gentleness, quietude, reflection, and maybe mourning. There is a very low likelihood that any of these species will survive the 21st century, and so perhaps we might acknowledge their passage with a moment of our attention, with the recognition of our kinship, and with a commitment to personal and systemic change. Thank you for listening. On today's show, we consider the Giant Quiver Tree. The Giant Quiver Tree is a large succulent tree native to the southwestern African continent, specifically the arid west of the country of South Africa and the rugged mountains of southern Namibia. It is characterized by a distinctive dichotomous branching pattern, so that means that each branch repeatedly divides into two equal branches, forming a kind of like upward symmetry. Mature specimens can reach heights of 50 feet, with a trunk diameter ranging from 3 to 6 feet at the base, gradually narrowing towards the top. The trunk is covered in fissured golden white bark. The giant quiver tree has adapted for frequent drought and maximum sun exposure. Its branches are made of a fiber that is soft and penetrable, in which it stores water. And in response to extremes in its habitat, it can shed its leaves and branches if deemed detrimental to its survival. Those fallen, hollow branches lend the quiver tree its name, as indigenous people would use them to store arrows. The leaves of the giant quiver tree are pale, wide, and curved, arranged in a rosette pattern at the ends of the branches. A rosette is a circular arrangement of leaves that radiate outward from a central point, and so this arrangement maximizes sunlight exposure for each leaf. The leaves themselves have a waxy surface. This is an adaptation that minimizes water loss in their dry environment. The giant quiver tree is in the Aloidendron family, a genus that includes aloe vera, which may be familiar. It too is a succulent, which is a term that refers to the plant's ability to store water in its fleshy leaves, its branches, and trunk. The giant quiver tree produces vibrant yellow flowers that hang in clusters below its leafy rosettes. The giant quiver tree reproduces sexually. It's a monoecious species, meaning that the tree produces both male and female flowers, though the giant quiver, unlike some monoecious species, cannot self-pollinate. So pollination is primarily facilitated by birds, particularly sugar birds, drawn to the yellow flowers and their nectar. After successful pollination, seeds develop within capsules and are dispersed by the wind and by gravity. Those seeds germinate most successfully when temperatures remain between 60 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit and some precipitation is present. Fertilized seeds are viable for 2 to 5 years. During times of drought, the giant quiver will pause its reproductive cycle by not growing flowers at all. The eldest living giant quiver trees are estimated to be 450 years old. Fossil record suggests that these tree aloe species, like the giant quiver, diverged around 18 million years ago, so a distinct species since the Miocene period. In the dream, reaching, a slow skyward stretching, a contented, aged sunbather in a green bonnet. In the dream, gregarious, have a little more, rest a while here with me. The fox rode sweetly among the folds of her skirt. The sugar bird leaned against her golden shoulder, steady and open-armed for as long as memory. Perennial means lasting or existing for an apparently infinite time. And it so does seem. It so does seem until the shy rain, until the long drought, and the aching thirst. And then time is finite, and this is good night. In the dream, this is good night. The giant quiver tree's native habitat is primarily concentrated in a narrow band along the border between Namibia and South Africa, specifically in the northern Cape province of South Africa and the southern regions of Namibia. This is an extreme habitat marked by low rainfall, high temperature, and intense sunlight. Average annual rainfall ranges from only half of an inch to 2 inches. with most precipitation occurring during the summer months in the form of short, intense thunderstorms. Temperatures can fluctuate dramatically, with scorching daytime highs reaching up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer and nighttime lows dropping below freezing during the winter. The giant quiver typically grows on rocky slopes, hillsides, and dry riverbeds, sometimes forming small, isolated populations, or often there are instances of just like a single, solitary tree. But in the quiver tree forest in Namibia, hundreds of these trees stand clustered together. Their tall branching forms creating an uncanny silhouette and a kind of micro-habitat where patches of hardy vegetation and animal life can thrive on the forest floor. The giant quiver is one of the few large perennial plants that tolerates the extreme conditions of this region, and as such, it's an important source of shelter, nectar, food, and moisture, especially for the avian species. It shares its habitat with a richness of biodiversity. Starling, adder, mouse, sunbird, grasses, black scorpion, fox, mongoose, praying mantis, falcon, tortoise, grasshopper, shrubs, hyena, ostrich, nightjar, leopards, larks, bats, zebra, and many more. As for threats to the giant quiver tree, it is being illegally harvested. Though protected and barred from international trade, there's still a demand for this tree in the black market, particularly among collectors of rare and exotic plants, so sometimes it is being illegally poached from its native habitat. Also, human encroachment, which right now is being driven by mining, is resulting in ongoing habitat loss. The development of the mines themselves and the kind of surrounding infrastructure to support those mines is claiming habitat and also has secondary impacts such as creating these windblown sand dumps and is requiring like new water use in an already water scarce region. Giant quiver tree is also threatened by human-induced climate change, which has resulted in extreme droughts over the last 20 years in particular, which has concluded in both individual tree deaths and reduced reproduction across the population. Changing weather and precipitation patterns and increasing temperatures continue to pressure an already challenged population. About 10 years ago, scientists attempted to model future climate change effect on the remaining giant quiver habitat and population. They used two climate prediction models, estimating outward to 2080, looking at a best-case scenario in which greenhouse gas emissions were substantially reduced in the early part of our century, and then also looking at a worst-case scenario model in which emissions continued at 2014 levels. In that worst-case scenario, all of the giant quiver's native habitat would be rendered uninhabitable by heat and drought by 2080, leading to total extinction in the wild. And then in the best case scenario, only 18% of the giant quiver's population would survive, leaving us with roughly 600 trees by 2080. Fortunately, most of the giant quiver's current habitat and the tree itself is protected by the Richtersveld's Transfrontier Park, which has active management and regular monitoring of the tree and its ecosystem. The giant quiver was placed on the critically endangered red list in 2022. But their population is currently in decline. Our most recent counts estimate that less than 7,000 giant quiver tree remain in the wild. Research for today's show was compiled from the IUCN, South African National Biodiversity Institute, and Wikipedia. In a moment, I would like to perform some music in hopes of opening a space to be in contemplation of the other lives with whom we share our earth. But briefly, I want to clarify what feels sort of like a nuanced idea. I don't want to suggest that this music is like for the giant quiver tree. I don't think of the giant quiver tree as like a muse or a vessel upon which I place meaning. It is an ancient living being with its own agency and lifespan. And so, instead, I want this music to express my very human awe. I want it to be a means to consider my own relationship to other life, and specifically as that life may near extinction. And so I will sit in the space of sound and awe and contemplation, and I warmly invite you to join me. I honor the resilient life force of the giant quiver tree. I do not know its language, so I will carry its human name in my record. I am grateful to have shared time on our bright planet with this being. I lament the ways in which I and my species have harmed and diminished this species. And so, in the name of the giant quiver tree, I pledge to reduce my consumption and my carbon footprint and endeavor to curb my wastefulness. I pledge to address the costs of my actions and inactions. I pledge to name and resist the harm of any kin or their habitat by corporations and governments. And I pledge my song to the witness and memory of all life, to a broad celebration of biodiversity, and to the total liberation of all beings. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's take care of each other and all of our kin. Goodbye.